Hi, I'm Marty Grisani, and this is The Marty Grisani Show. As a full-time real estate investor and business owner, I have a real fascination of finding the key principles for business success and personal development. This show is a reflection of my personal mission to find out what truly makes somebody successful in business and in life. We will find tools and tactics that they've used to reach those levels. If you're the type of person is not satisfied with average and you have a hunger for learning that will never cease, this show is for you. Welcome to the show.
All right.
And we're live.
Cool.
We are here. How's it feel?
It's awesome. I love the setup. I've never done this, so thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no, it's great for you to be here, and it's a great setup.
Yeah.
Shout out to Cam and his team.
Yeah. And they worked overtime to make this happen.
I know. That's just me, right? Like I think because there's like so many different, there's a planning stage, there's the strategy, there's the clips I do, and then there's the podcast, and I get them mixed up. So
yeah, I can understand. This is a professional setup here for sure.
It's better than my basement.
Yeah.
That's where I was doing it. It was so Bush League, but look, we're here.
Yeah.
We're rocking. We're rolling.
Thanks for the invite. So how long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this for, I think, 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was like the Power Play podcast, probably like 100 episodes of that. And then we're at like 60 something with the Marty Grisani Show.
Nice.
And no, it's been great. But look, enough about me. Actually, I could keep going. No, but I'm really excited to talk to you because we kind of grew up in the business together.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, when you started and we started roughly the same time.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know you, Charles, who are you and what do you do and what's happening in the marketplace?
So I'm Charles Santoli. I do your closings. And as of about a year ago, maybe, evictions. So yeah, when you and Matt started, I think I was just finishing up law school. I was with John Naka, local attorney that does a ton of evictions. And so I was able to handle your closings while I was there. I was with him for 5 years. Joined Black Longo, Lamarca, and Brzezinski.
Which, by the way, congrats on being partner there.
Yeah, thank you.
Just recently.
So I made partner there and been with them now going on almost 6 years. So I've been an attorney for 10 or 11, roughly. And nothing but real estate closings and evictions. So that's been growing. So with respect to the marketplace, it's, quarter one was a lot like quarter one last year. So that was a little bit slower. But things are picking up here in quarter two. And yeah, the eviction business for me wasn't planned, but that's been growing. So I appreciate the business you send me, and I like going to city court. It's a different side of practice of law. Doing closings, you're at your desk and you don't really see court too often. You're not dressed up too much, and it's more laid back. So that's nice. There's benefits to that, but it is nice getting in front of a judge and doing that too.
It's funny. This is like a topic no one talks about, really. Like you don't see a lot on podcasts because it's not sexy and it's not nice. Yeah. Evictions is tough, and it's the last thing we want to do. I think people have like a thought that this is something that there's no enjoyment as an investor, right? To do that. Like the last thing we want is for this to occur. We actually do everything possible in order for this to not happen. Yeah. To the point of we will literally pay you to leave. Yeah. Right. But it's just so interesting that it's not talked about, but it's stuff that happens every single day, and it's part of the deal. Like if you want to be a real estate investor, you're going to most likely do an eviction in your career. And you should know the law, number one, and you should be comfortable knowing that, hey, it probably will happen, and then you're going to need somebody on your team to do it, because I think gone are the days that a individual investor can do these things on their own.
Yeah. So yeah, I also own property and rent it out myself, and I could say that having experience with evictions allows me the comfort level to be able to invest. And so to investors out there, potential investors, you certainly want to set up a relationship with someone that knows landlord-tenant law and can handle evictions, at the very least for the peace of mind, because, like you said, you really don't plan on them. You hopefully never happen or have to do them, but inevitably it will. And it gives you the ability to sleep at night knowing that if something goes south, you have a phone number to call and somebody that you have a rapport with that could solve a problem. And so, I got to give a lot of credit to John Naka and Aaron Elsner there, because they're the ones that really trained me in that world and allowed me to invest. And I really bought property and invested prior to taking on eviction work myself. And that happened after we bought the couple properties we own and rent out. And now that I know more of the ins and outs, I'm still learning. There's a lot of nuance to it, and there's certainly a lot of complications that happen that you don't anticipate. There's a lot of discretion for judges, so there's a learning curve to it. But now that I know it, I feel as though I can provide guidance for people, new investors, to allow them the comfort level to buy more, and then myself as well. So certainly, I mean, the landlord-tenant process in court is intimidating. And when someone calls me and having never done one before, and they're starting at ground zero, like, what do I do? Is this going to take a year? Is this going to take 6 months? It's nice to, normally when we get off the phone after 20 minutes of, going through the spiel, you can tell a weight's been lifted, because it's, at least you're not going to be held hostage forever.
Yeah, I bet.
There is an end.
I bet. I think that's probably one of the tougher things, is like a new investor walking into an issue where they have to do an eviction.
Yeah.
And again, it rarely is it you buy a house and then you're just trying to get somebody out. Like, for anybody. I think, again, it's more a situation where maybe there's a group of people living in a house and then one leaves and then somebody moves in their place, right? That's unannounced. Yeah. And then they're the reason there's a problem, right? It's usually a problem person is causing it.
Yes.
We'll work with people all day long and we do, right? We have countless payment plans. Yeah. It's just like, we're good. Just keep to you do what you say you're going to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to say I'm going to do. I'm going to be the best landlord. I'm going to keep the property nice. I'm going to do all the things you need it to be done. You just have to keep your end of the bargain, which is paying rent, right? So, no, that's good. I think what's funny, though, to me is it's such a good niche for somebody who's willing to take it on, because it's not sexy, right? It's no one goes, and maybe I'm wrong, but does anybody ever go to law school and go, I'm going to be an eviction attorney?
No. And I don't even like telling people I do evictions.
But that's not fair, because you are adding a lot of value to people. And I think, and here's the messed up thing in my brain, when I do an eviction and I get somebody out and I'll talk to them after, it's almost like, hey, you needed to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good situation for you. You needed to start fresh somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you needed to get maybe your life in order. And this was a wake-up call. Yeah. This was, you needed to get services from, outside agencies because you were having maybe a mental issue, physical issue. This was a wake-up call a lot of times for people. And I think those are needed, but what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, there is I think I heard it honestly from another podcast, but the story is that there was this guy that was primarily responsible for firing people, and it was brought to this person's attention. How could you do that? Don't you feel bad about that part of the job? And this person was like, no, honestly, to a certain extent, I try to, maybe this is a spin, an optimistic spin, but I see it as what you're saying. This is inevitable. This isn't working. And maybe this is the best thing that happens to you because you're going to find a different situation and think, wow, looking back on it, this is much better than it was before. And a lot of times the relationships break down with the management company or with the owner or with the neighbor that lives, if it's a duplex in the other unit. And sometimes a push is needed. People don't like change, so they'd rather deal with this problem. And the push is the change that's needed to get into a better circumstance and situation, either because the rent is cheaper so you could afford it and that's a better quality of life, or because there's confrontation either with the management company or with the owner or with the neighbor, and so this is avoiding that. And I don't go to court and be confrontational unless it's necessary. So for the most part, I try to work with people and get a result that's amicable and allows people to feel like they didn't completely lose on both sides, with my client and with the tenant, and just start anew somewhere else.
Yeah, I think there's, it's, giving people integrity, having integrity and giving them like a feeling like, hey, this is something that, I'm not trying to make you look bad as we do this, right? Yeah. And what I mean by that is, for instance, you're also a way to like, hey, this person's willing to stay if you can put them on a payment plan. They had a hiccup, but they buried their head in the sand for a little while, and they didn't want to tell you what the problem was. But as I was in front of the judge, they had to wake up and they realized that, hey, I realized that I am in trouble. Yeah. And there was a lot of other situations that were happening in my life, but I'm willing to like stay here, and I want to stay here, and I'm going to take my head out of the sand. But you, Mr. Landlord, you got to do X, Y, and Z for this person. Okay, cool. If they're going to, if we do that, will they stay and pay? Yes. Okay. And I think it takes sometimes, like you said, nuance as an eviction attorney, where we don't walk in trying to get somebody out. You're not trying to, that's not like always the end result. It's, hey, let's put this person on a payment plan. Let's give them a month or two to catch up, whatever it might be. But sometimes the managers need that because they can't handle that. They don't they're not nimble and flexible to kind of understand things, right? Yeah. And so they need to hear it from you and not the tenant. Yeah. And the tenant needs to hear it from you and not their landlord, right? So it's, you have to juggle people a lot and play to their, hey, look, we're going to work this out. The only times where it doesn't work is if there's just no response, right? Like those are like the, look, they're not coming back to me, or they just left the property, and legally we have to serve them an eviction to make sure we do it the right way. But what's your take on that?
Well, sometimes it works that I could play good cop or bad cop depending on the relationship with the landlord. Sometimes the landlord is maybe too soft or even intimidated or scared to get what they need out of the situation. So I could come in and juxtapose their personality with my personality and be more bad cop and vice versa. But also, ultimately, sometimes to your point, there is no solution but moving on. And so it's nice to, ultimately what I try to do is I try to communicate as much as I can with the landlord prior to going to court. I don't have a volume that is overwhelming to where I can't do that. So then I could get a solution that sort of works out for everybody, including the court, because, let's be honest, the court is in a position where they have to make a decision, but they necessarily don't want to make a decision in every case. So it works to their benefit as well if I could negotiate a settlement and not force the judge to rule on every single matter.
Right.
So being able to go in with a plan and try to negotiate an agreement to take it out of the hands of the judge makes the judge happy.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I like that work. I like closings as well, and I realistically prefer to do those. But I don't want to. Now that I've been doing more evictions, and I'm in court often, It's not every day, but it's probably every 3 days. I'd like to keep this pace going.
Good.
I enjoy it.
Good. Yeah, I think this is a little off topic, but I think nobody goes into the business thinking that about evictions, right? But it's so important, and the laws are constantly changing too.
Yeah.
Can you just give a little summary of how it goes? Like, what are the things that are needed to be done? What's like, hey, from A to Z on an eviction, this is what needs to be done in order to have it be completed.
Yeah. So first, I think it's important to delineate between the city and the towns. There's a lot of judge discretion with respect to landlord-tenant matters. So
Means what?
meaning the rules aren't hard and fast everywhere. And so I'd like to just focus more on the city of
Sure.
Rochester as opposed to the towns, because every town's going to be different. With respect to the city, primarily there's 2 evictions. You're going to do a holdover, meaning the lease is expired or they're on a month-to-month lease, or non-payment of rent. And, sometimes clients will call me about a lease violation. Hey, my lease says they can't have dogs. They have 5 dogs. Within the city limits, it's hard to evict for those types of matters. It's important to remember that the tenants do have rights as though the apartment is their home. And so you have to, clients call me and they say, well, I own the property, so why can't I do this? And, well, even though you own the property on the deed, the tenants are going to have specific rights because this is their home, even though they don't own it. So lease violations are tricky, and primarily 99% of evictions are going to be holdover or non-payment. If you're going to move forward with a non-payment eviction, it requires a 5-day notice that can just be mailed. And then there's a 14-day notice after the 5 days is up. So the idea is you have to make sure that the tenant knows that they owe rent. We don't want, the legislature doesn't want people bringing evictions against people that have no idea they owe the rent. Again, from a landlord's perspective, you're like, of course they know, but it's certainly possible that if you want somebody out, that you could spring this on them, and they were unaware. So you have to let the court know when you file the petition that I've provided them with a 5-day and served them. So the 14-day has to be served with a process server, a 14-day notice, and no response, no payment. Then you could file the petition. And so when that's all said and done, 5 days plus 14 days, and then you file, and court's roughly a month out, you're into this about 45 days, and then we get into court. And the other type of eviction is a holdover, meaning the lease is expired, or they signed a month-to-month lease, and so they agreed to being on a month-to-month term and not a year term. And then the notice on that, so it's not 5-day or 14-day, it's a notice that needs to be served, and it's 30, 60, or 90-day notice, depending on how long the tenant has been there. So if they've been there under a year, it's 30 days, over a year, but under 2, it's 60 days, and over 2 years is 90 days. So you serve them that expires, that actually gives them to the end of the lease term, so it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not really 30, 60, or 90, it's when that expires, then the end of that month. So if it expires on June 15th, it'll actually give them till the end of June. So you wouldn't be able to file in court until July 1st, and then you file in court, and again, it's a month out after that. So that takes a lot longer. Now, the difference between the two when you get into court is a non-payment, the tenant's allowed to raise habitability issues, so they could state, well, I haven't paid rent because the roof leaks or the toilet doesn't work or heat doesn't work. Whereas a holdover, the habitability concerns aren't relevant. So they're not allowed to raise those in court because it has nothing to do with money. So it's just your lease expired. Are you still in the premises? Yes, then you got to get out. Now, to add another element to this is when you do a holdover eviction, it's going to be easier when you get in court, but you can't ask for a money judgment, non-payment of rent. We could get a judgment potentially if the tenant is personally served. So it's more technical than you think, but ultimately once you once you kind of understand that there's only two roads you could go down, it's actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I would still say you need somebody to really be in your corner that knows this and that knows all of the different stipulations and the little things that can go on.
Well, yeah. So the problem is you got to get them served with a process server. You can't serve somebody yourself,
right?
Because you're an interested party. So that's not proper service. So you need to know a process server. We have relationships with process servers that get our work done quickly. It's not just a Joe Schmo calling somebody, and you get put on the bottom of the list, and it could take a week to serve somebody. And then, of course, you got to still file a petition, and that needs to be done properly, and there's forms to that. You need to spell out certain specific items in your petition. And, the courts are going to, first of all, Legal Aid Society is there in city court to represent tenants, so they're going to be looking through your paperwork with a fine-tooth comb, and then courts will too. I mean, the judges are going to make sure that you've brought everything properly. So, yeah, it's. I would certainly suggest people hire an attorney.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It would be way too daunting of a task to do on your own. Let's talk about squatters, and that has been an issue for me. Yeah. Buying vacant houses, and then all of a sudden you go to do the work, and then there's somebody there, right?
Yeah. So the problem with squatters is typically, first of all, you have to determine if they are in fact squatters, because if a tenant was paying rent at some point, but they haven't paid it to you, they still could technically be considered a tenant. So trying to figure out if they've ever paid rent, because then that's going to change the eviction type you bring. You could bring non-payment or holdover. If they've never paid rent to anybody, or they were the property owner and they lost it to tax foreclosure, then they're going to be considered a squatter. So then that's a 10-day notice. But the tricky part in city court is you really got to try to get their names on the petition.
Right.
So you got to get to the property, knock on the door, try to get their names. If you can't, we could still move forward, but it could be problematic when you get to court. So in the back of your mind, you got to know that if I just have John Doe and Jane Doe on a petition because we don't know the names of the tenants, that could potentially get thrown out if we didn't do an adequate job of at least trying to get their names and then spelling that in the petition. We want to put it in the petition. Hey, we went on such and such a day and tried to get their names, and they didn't come to the door, or they weren't very nice to us, and so we didn't get their names, and we tried again. Like, you want to see some effort,
right?
Because bringing an eviction petition in the name of John and Jane Doe might seem efficient and quick and easy, but the courts don't like it, so you got to try to avoid that. Sometimes it's not avoidable.
What about was there some new legislation in New York State that occurred with squatters? Has that been passed? What's the deal with?
Well, so it's not legislation. What they did was they changed the definition the definition of tenant to exclude squatter. So prior, the definition in the legislation, so it's not new legislation, they just removed a term in the definition. But to my knowledge now, so that was recent. That was about a month ago, give or take a couple of weeks. Might even be under a month. But it really hasn't changed anything. I think the goal was if you remove squatter from the definition of tenant, that now if there's a squatter in your premises, you could call city police. It really hasn't resulted in any substantive change because the police, that's still a question of fact. Like when you call the police and say, hey, I have a squatter in my building, unless, of course, they just broke in 20 minutes ago, if they have belongings in there, the police are going to be hesitant to essentially throw somebody out without a court order. And so you still find yourself, there's a question of fact, are they a squatter or are they not? And the police are going to defer to judges, and they're going to say, look, I want a judge to issue a warrant of eviction because then I can rely on that. Yeah. What if you're lying to me, they're not a squatter, you just want to rely on city police to get them out now, and we're doing the wrong thing here. So I have had clients call the city police to say there's a squatter in there and end up back with me a day later, unfortunately filing an eviction or doing the squatter notice and then filing an eviction because the police were skittish about moving forward with that.
Yeah, and they've been under the same law for, whatever. It hasn't changed. So like something serious would have to happen for the police to start going, yeah, okay, we're going to start getting these people out. Like it's less, this is going to sound kind of messed up, but it's less work for them to have to do.
Well, certainly. And it's less risk. Like you don't want to be in a position where you're when you're as a police officer participating in an illegal eviction, right? So the court order allows you to rely on something a judge signed, and so it all comes down to liability. And if a judge signed the warrant of eviction, then you're just executing orders as opposed to making decisions.
Right.
Of course, if the door's broken down, that's a different story. But for the most part, you'll have a squatter who got in somehow that you don't even have proof of a break-in, and they might have belongings in there because they've been in this unit for weeks or months, and then you're going to have to do an eviction in that case.
It's just crazy to me to think that somebody can go to a empty Airbnb, break in, set up a fake lease, and live there and have maybe 3 months of free living.
Yeah, and that's the problem. So, having done mostly closings for years and then taking on eviction work, like I said, roughly starting a year ago, the worst part about doing evictions is clients really like to vent to me as though I'm the legislature.
Right.
And it's, I don't write the rules. The lawyer knows the rules and is going to help you operate within the rules.
Right.
But I'm certainly not writing the rule book.
Right.
So it's hard because people call me and they're like, what do you mean I got to do an eviction? Or what do you mean it's going to take a month? Or, and the fact pattern is such that I'm sympathetic to their position. Like, okay, I understand. I'm not saying this is right.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is how it works.
Yeah.
So you have to write your legislature if you want that change.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you what the rules are and how to proceed.
And it's so crazy that what probably started as a thought from the legislature as this is going to be protecting tenants actually ends up hurting them. And so, for example, and I'm sure you have a few, like, look, nobody goes into owning properties to be a slumlord, right? But what happens is that, you buy a property and I'll go down a giant tangent with like auctions, right?
Yeah.
A lot of beginners start by buying a house at auction because they're, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 houses.
Yeah.
When reality is that should be the most expert buyers. And so people buy these $20,000 houses, fix them up, put in a tenant, and then, get the C of O, do everything the right way, and then that tenant stops paying. Well, now you have 6 months, let's say, of no rent coming in, and you're still paying insurance, taxes, maintenance. You're getting beat up by the city because the lawns are high. And then you do finally get them out. Now you lost all that money in rent. And now if you do have the funds, you got to go in and redo the property again because it probably wasn't in good shape if they're leaving it and it's an eviction. 8 times out of 10, it's not going to be in good shape.
Yeah.
You go in, this is your last hurrah. You go in, you fix it up.
Yeah. Now you're running on fumes.
You're running on fumes. You get another tenant in there and they don't pay, it's over. Now you're a slumlord because you don't have the funds to fix it up.
Yeah.
And so it really, the cities you can see kind of are allowing these tax auctions to happen. And all you need to do is come up with $500 to $1,000 in your hand and you could be just Joe Schmo when you really should be vetted even harder than anybody else if you're buying these. And oh, by the way, they're probably in an area that's been highly redlined for, 50, 60 years. So, these are either the people that should be buying properties in those situations are either government entities or people who they're just, they're wealthy enough where it won't make a difference to them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just, it really sucks because I would be willing to give more people opportunities in our units if I knew I could, hey, this isn't working out. you're not doing what you said you were going to do. I did everything I said I was going to do. You're not doing what you said you were going to do. I want you to leave. I'd be so more willing to give people an option and give them a chance if I knew that if they could leave in a decent time.
Yeah.
Right. So now what you see is more people are willing to keep their properties vacant for a longer period of time until they find that, perfect tenant.
Yeah.
Because it's not worth the ajda and everything else if you don't pick the right tenant. It's like it's a super big deal to choosing a tenant to come into your property.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Or another way it could hurt tenants is instead of waiting 2 months for someone to get back on their feet, I have people that once I got burned once, if somebody owes $150, they want to get going on an eviction right away because they don't want to mess around and wait 3 months.
Great point.
So then people are always getting 14-day notice served on them because they know it's going to take a while.
Yeah,
so certainly,
great point.
I mean, it's there's a lot of problems that don't have easy fixes. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah,
unless you have, like you said, nothing but wealthy investors, which is unlikely. And there's no way of keeping people out. I think the best thing that you could do, one is in these podcasts, explain to people, look, first of all, if you're buying a house, you're not buying a business. So I do closings all the time where even on the closing statement, people are like, well, is that rent adjustment correct? Shouldn't it be, $5 more here? I did the math, it's $5 more. And it's like, we're not going to fight over $5 on the closing, number one. But number two, you're buying you're buying a property, and if your margin is so tight that the $5 in rent you're now deciding you no longer want to close,
right?
Then you're not. This isn't the business model.
No.
That you're not buying this right.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of making sure that potential investors up front are aware to build in, to make sure that if your numbers say this is you're going to get a 20% rate of return, maybe you should, build in more wiggle room.
Yeah.
And because if you're not going to get 20%, and you probably won't, then and it's not going to be affordable, then you probably shouldn't be buying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And a really good point about now people are so scared of a delay in payment that they'll just hit you right away with a 14-day notice. That's a really good point. And that's, again, the law that just, that was passed in 2019, I think it was, the Tenant Protection Act. Yeah. That, I think, was just, was any landlord probably talked to when the state was coming up with these laws, hey, what are the repercussions if we do this? And I think they're feeling it now, and it's to a point where I'll even have conversations, again, this isn't happening as much anymore, but I would have conversations with people at Section 8 or DSS or Providence Housing, name it. And I'd say, this is crazy. Why aren't, what you guys, they're like, we agree. This is not right. Because there'd be situations where you'd have a duplex and you got one tenant paying and they're both paying, but one is harassing another one. And if you don't want to be able to, if they're saying, hey, you can't do, what's the new law that they're trying to pass where you can't evict on a lease renewal?
Yeah. The good faith.
Good faith evictions.
Yes.
That is bananas. If you have a duplex and you have both people paying, but one is harassing, which was happening in one of my properties, harassing the other tenant, but they were paying, I can't legally evict that person. Yeah. And they were harassing this person because it would be, their lease was still in order. Yeah. And so, and I would talk to, and I'm like, you need to come out and speak on behalf of property owners as well. And I'm talking to DSS section. We could say it all day long because everybody thinks that we're all multimillionaire, landowners, when it's not the case. Yeah. But none of them ever did. And I think that would have been helpful if some of those government entities that see this every day. They get it. They know that it's not, that these laws are not helping their tenant or helping out the person they work with. I just thought that was tough. That was tough.
Yeah, well, you can't change any rules without there being repercussions or negative impacts, and some of the negative impacts are unforeseeable, but some aren't. And again, it's hard because being an attorney, in theory, I could be part of the legislature if I was elected in, and I have no intentions of doing that because I don't. There's always too many negative impacts to any decision that's made to where I would be comfortable making those decisions. I would rather just operate within the rules.
Sure.
So it certainly keeps me employed. So the problems make so you have to hire an attorney. So to a certain extent, there's benefit to me directly on it. But I understand where you're coming from, and I don't have a solution. I don't have an idea that would solve that. No. I mean, it's even worse than that. I mean, you're talking about a tenant who's harassing another tenant, but there could be just a problematic house where there's drug activity or gang activity, and same thing. As long as they're paying, you could be stuck. And then it's not just other neighbors that are upset. The police are upset. The city's upset.
Right.
So and then it makes it all about money in that regard. Right. And as long as you're getting the money, then you don't have a solution. And sometimes in those instances, it has nothing to do with money.
Right. And then you get to the point of, well, why would I want to invest in these areas? Yeah. So it makes perfect sense why there's not a lot of people that are in Florida, Texas, investing in New York when it's the other way around. New Yorkers are investing in Florida and Texas because money will go where it's treated best. Yeah. And it's not treated very well here. Yeah. And, that's another reason why, okay, look, Rochester in particular, when you have a very old housing stock, one of the oldest in the nation, so you add that plus, you add that plus, we don't have a crazy amount of job growth and everything else. It makes it really tough for people who want to invest here. So you got to do as much as you can so people would want to invest here because the more money that came here, the better the housing would be. Yeah. And so I think there's just been some big misses, and that's really unfortunate because what happens with these laws, the harder it is for the mom and pops to make money or at least just to break even, the more that giant corporations come in, and we saw it 2 years ago, didn't we? Yeah. SFR3 came here, bought up, I don't even know how many houses, 400 houses. Yeah. And they were like, oh, what's a C of O? What's this lien? What's this law? And now these properties, a lot of them turned into shambles. Yeah. A lot of them got worse. Yeah. So it just sucks because you have these mom and pops that are selling to larger corporations. And so what do? What does that mean? What happens there? Well, you lose the person-to-person connection. Yeah. Right? Like if it's me and I own 4 houses, you're probably going to be willing to work with the tenant, right? You're probably going to be willing to, make sure you take care of things right away because it's your property. You probably grew up near it or maybe you lived there at one point. Yeah. But when it's just a dot in a spreadsheet, you're not going to get the same care. And I think that's a huge miss that the city is not seeing as well. Yeah, I would agree. I have nothing to add to that. I think you're spot on. And most of the time, it's the mom and pops that heavily rely on every rent check. Yeah. And are willing to establish relationships with tenants that make it easier for tenants too. Right. So the problem, the pendulum swings one way or the other, and sometimes it's going to swing too much in favor of one side, and then you get the unforeseen circumstances or the unforeseen negative impacts that trickle down and make for the problem just mushrooms. Well, you're in a really unique position because you're very good at what you do, and another big thing with having an attorney when on your side with these things is communication. And because people just want to know, hey, how's it going? And so, you having a team, it's not just you, I think is critical to your success. And it's why I think you've been successful, is because you have people that can get back to people when they need to. And it's not, because if you're at the court, it's not always easy to get back and let them know, hey, here's what's going on. And so having somebody that's, the mouthpiece and just somebody that's helping out and liaison, doing all the things it's a big deal. I think that's one of the biggest problems that investors have, is not getting feedback on what's going on with this property, because they lose track of time. And it's so I think that you guys do that very, very well.
Thanks. Yeah, no. Well, evictions is quantity-based work, just like closings. And so in theory, I could grow to the point where I'm not able to communicate as much. But right now that hasn't happened, and we've prided ourselves on communication, because ultimately with an explanation comes an understanding and a willingness to move forward. Without an explanation, if I'm just sending you what happened in court and not explaining why, then you're left with more questions and more frustration, which in theory you could take out on future tenants and future problems. Yeah. So yeah, we've tried to do that. Again, it's quantity based work, so it's see how I'm doing in 5 years. But so far so good.
Good. And then a couple things, and then we can wrap up. But do you do business evictions?
Yeah, commercial evictions are we do them. It's the same process. Yeah. Essentially.
Interesting.
The lease is more controlling, so the notices aren't going to necessarily be the same. The lease is going to have more power, but you're still filing in town court or city court. You can still handle those in the same type of court.
What about foreclosures?
No, it's a different world, and
you don't want to be doing a foreclosure.
No, it's not that I don't want. I just
as an investor, it takes way longer, correct?
Oh, yeah. The process is certainly longer.
What is average foreclosure?
The best of my knowledge, it's roughly a year and a half.
Wow.
And there's going to be more court appearances. Eviction in theory you could handle in one court appearance, and this will be multiple. It's going to be more expensive. So, yeah, in terms of seller financing, if you're a property owner and you want to sell out your portfolio with seller finance loans, because you're going to make some money and at the closing, and then also make some money every month with mortgage payments, understand that an eviction is going to cost you roughly $750 to $1,000, and a foreclosure is going to be thousands. And in the meantime, you're going to be coming out of pocket to pay the property taxes to make sure that it doesn't get foreclosed on by the tax authorities out from under you. Right. So your mortgage is going to grow based on the amount of money you're spending out of pocket to keep it out of other foreclosures. Right. And then you're left with the same problem. It's a vacant house with issues, and it took 2 years instead of 3 months. So I would stay away from doing seller financing and getting yourself into foreclosure. Yeah. But I don't handle those myself, and I'm limited in my knowledge in that.
What else should we know about with your closings? That you do a lot of closings, obviously, for us and for other people. What are you seeing? Is the market, are you seeing a lot of deals coming across your desk? Do you think is it still hot, or what is your thoughts on the market in general?
The market, so to delineate between investor market and primary residence market, the primary residence market, the quarter one was slow again. It wasn't as bad as quarter one in 2023, but it was still slower, and that's picking up. The investor market has always remained pretty steady. Yeah. There's still going to be investors with cash to where interest rates aren't going to impact it. Right. And there's still going to be investors that own property that want to get out, and potential investors that want to get in. Yeah. So those have remained steady. But the primary residence stuff started slow and is definitely picking back up, but there's still not a lot on the market right now. There's not a lot of sellers. Okay.
Anything you want to leave us with?
No, I appreciate the invite and the time and the business you send me, and that's it. Call me for evictions.
Okay, there you have it, folks. Yeah, it's not the call you want to make, but it's the call that you need to make. And Charles has been very helpful since we started, and I'm just happy that we're where we're at, and we don't have many of them, but we have a lot of closings, and we love doing those.
Yeah, congrats to you. You've been growing ever since we started. So
I appreciate you, buddy.
yeah.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. You take care.
Thank you for tuning into the Marty Grisani Show. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, leave us an honest rating and review. If you're on Spotify, make sure you follow us for weekly episodes.